These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at raycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm wrinkle reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Beyond the Valley by Ramesh Srinivasan. This is from Chapter 1, The Power of Data. In November 2017, my Apple MacBook Pro was stolen. It happened on the island of Ibiza, where I was visiting my friend, a documentary filmmaker. We were thinking of making a series of short films to illustrate innovative uses of new technology around the world. We sat together writing down examples of technological innovation, subversion, and creativity we'd already witnessed. We discussed themes I explore in this book, such as surveillance, the gig economy, and the future of work, artificial intelligence, and cryptocurrencies. After uploading our ideas to Google's cloud-based storage platform, Google Drive, we took a short break, locking our laptops in the trunk of our rented car. When we returned, both laptops were gone. Although upset, I was also relieved. I'd be able to recover most of my data because almost all of it was in the cloud. That was what I signed on to when I stored my files with Google as well as with Apple, Microsoft, and Dropbox. But in the bargain, I'd allowed them to profit from my data. It dawned on me, given the terms of service I'd agreed to, that the value of the data of my data to the storage companies was far greater than the value of my laptop to the thief. How many of us are fully aware that companies providing us with cloud storage have ways to monetize our data? They use targeted advertising, for instance, and charge fees once we get hooked on the security and peace of mind that their free services offer. We put faith in these companies to store our files securely, but our private information may no longer remain private if, let's say, the government asks to search through our data. It's also not private because all this data is surveilled, computed, and often manipulated in mysterious ways to influence and shape our behaviors as these corporations see fit. By creating accounts with these companies, we give them access to ourselves. So when we consent to privacy policies, in reality, we're signing on to systems of surveillance never before seen in human history, and we do so without being included or consulted. By desiring to keep our data accessible and recoverable, we lock ourselves into using their services. As I thought about getting my files back in Ibiza, I wondered, does access to my own property have to come with such strings attached? In my relationship to Apple, I find the strings impossible to untie. By purchasing an Apple laptop, I had unwittingly transformed from a customer into a part of the company's product line. I had provided Apple with private data and trusted Apple to protect it. Now, to retrieve that data, I had to purchase a new laptop with Apple-owned peripherals and devices. So I caught the next flight to Madrid. I then took the train to the city's Apple store located in Puerto del Sol. In many ways, this Central Plaza still serves in its centuries-old role as a landmark and gathering place for the entire Spanish nation, a point from which numerous roads emanate. With its distinctive aesthetic and its strategic placement in a civic space, the Apple Store stood out among the adjacent parliamentary and government buildings as if the global brand were more powerful than Spain itself. The day I was there, more people entered and left the Apple Store than passed through the doors of my neighboring building. In 2017, Apple, a private corporation worth more than $1 trillion, actually began to conceptualize its retail stores as town squares, thereby branding itself an integral part of our everyday lives. Other big technology corporations describe themselves in similar terms. Facebook CEO and founder Mark Zuckerberg, for instance, refers to the company as a social infrastructure for the global community. So what we have in the digital world are privately owned public spheres. They're branded as public, civic, and virtuous, but in reality are dominated by a single logic, extending profitability and economic value. How can these companies' interests be the same as the public interest? Like many other large corporations, Apple is shareholder-owned and therefore primarily accountable to its investors and executives, rather than to its employees, customers, or the general public. I had not begun to unpack the meaning of all this until I realized how monumental the Puerto del Sol Apple Store actually was, as an icon and a structure. As I walked into the store, an Apple employee invited me to purchase a new machine, log onto my iCloud account, and retrieve from Apple Cloud Storage the data that I lost from my stolen laptop. These transactions, completed in less than an hour, were simple and efficient. My data was extraterritorial, easily retrievable in Spain, and likely would be in most other countries. Purchasing a new laptop and getting my data back supported Apple's economic model. National borders were no threat or hindrance. The same was true with retrieving data I had stored on other corporate cloud servers managed by Google and Dropbox. In technology circles, this saying has made the rounds. If you're not the customer, then you're the product. Many of today's technologies come to us for free, but in return, our personal lives come for free to these technologies. But they are accessible for the company's profit and gain. Yes, when we search Google, we look for information, but do we realize that Google is also searching us? Users, and it goes on from there. So the book is Beyond the Valley by Ramesh Srinivasan.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you, officially opening our program at this moment. Are Americans going to reject Donald Trump and the Republican death cult this fall? I want to get into this in some detail a little later on in the program. In our second hour, David Sirota is going to drop by about how the 1% are cheating us out of $1 trillion in taxes right now. And in our third hour, we're going to get into this new school that has been opened by ICE to train civilians to arrest, quote, illegal aliens, end quote. Didn't Adolf Hitler try that? Wasn't that called the brown shirts? But right now, first, we have with us, and we're very pleased to have him back on the program, Senator Ron Wyden, my senator, one of my two senators. Wyden, wyden.senate.gov is the website. His Twitter handle, of course, at Ron Wyden. Senator, welcome back to the program, and thanks so much. We had federal police here in Portland, and they shot a kid over the weekend and wounded him quite badly in a way that would have been illegal for the city. The mayor, Mayor Wheeler, is pretty flipped out about this. What's going on?
Well, it seems to me that peaceful protests, and we've seen this over time, are what's needed to keep up the pressure for real change, particularly rooting out systemic racism. And what we don't need is Donald Trump parachuting federal law enforcement into U.S. cities as if they're enemy strongholds requiring occupying armies to suppress. So that's what the issue is here, and I'll just give you my kind of bottom line, is Donald Trump is always talking about how he loves law and order, yet it seems that every instinct in him drives him to target lawful, peaceful protests, and he tries to inflame those debates into disorder.
Yeah, he said yesterday, quote, Portland was totally out of control, and we went in, and I guess we have many people right now in jail. We very much quelled it. If it starts again, we'll quell it very easily. It's not hard if you know what you're doing. Just shoot some people in the face?
Look, we're going to get the facts on what happened, but this isn't the first time we've seen the danger of Trump's tactics. I mean, last month in Washington, he deployed federal law enforcement as an occupying army against peaceful protesters so he could saunter over to a church for a bizarre photo op. And I have been leading the congressional Democrats to get the answers to that a few days after it happened. On the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, we have authority over the Interior Department. I said I wanted answers, and we're going to insist on the Government Accountability Office looking at it now.
Meanwhile, Mitch McConnell is looks like he's getting prepared. He's preparing to play this game that he's been playing with Democrats for years, where really critical legislation, he dances it right up to the last minute. I mean, the Senate is not coming back into session until 5 days before the enhanced unemployment benefits for 30 million Americans runs out. That's 11 days from now they run out. And McConnell is saying that $600 a week was a mistake. You've got the White House saying that's too much money. You've got Steve Mnuchin saying that we want to cut it back. What's going on? What can Americans? 30 million unemployed people are literally depending on this stuff.
Yeah, and we're not going to let Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump say to all those hurting workers who are trying to make rent and pay for groceries that they can go pound sand while he gives out goodies to his friends. I'm the guy who negotiated that $600 extra per week, each week through July 31st with Steve Mnuchin. Negotiations took place in the Senate Finance Room, and the reason we came up with the formula is Secretary of Labor Scalia, I'm sure your listeners remember that name, was completely uncooperative. He wouldn't work with us to come up with a basic replacement system. As we know, the states, including Oregon, have had a lot of challenges because they're using Bronze Age technology. But I'll tell you, we are not going to come out of these negotiations. And the ranking Democrat on the Finance Committee, having negotiated that package, Mitch McConnell is not going to be able to tell all those workers from sea to shining sea, he's not going to be able to tell them go pound sand and then give out goodies to his friends.
Yeah, well, I hope you are right. I really do. And I tip my hat to you for holding strong on this. 40%, we have a record 5.4 million people who have lost their health coverage. And this is a study that wrapped up at the end of May. So we don't have the statistics yet for June, and we are in July. But this was released by Families USA today, this report. And it's a 40% higher loss than in the 2008-2009 recession, and in which case 3.9 million adults lost insurance. So 5.4 million. Presumably, it's actually much higher than that now because we're 5 weeks down the road from this report, or from the compilation of this data. Is it time for major structural reform in the way that we're delivering not just health care, but right across the board, America's social safety net? It seems like other countries do this so efficiently.
Absolutely, and let me give you a couple of examples with respect to unemployment benefits. After July 31st, what I have proposed is that future benefits be tied to economic conditions on the ground. It's called the stabilizer. And what you do with that is you ensure, for example, that the far right, somebody like Mitch McConnell, can't hold everybody hostage every few months. And it really should respond to what Republicans say they're for. I mean, it's tied to marketplace conditions. When you have unemployment that's over 11%, you bet there ought to be another $600 a week. When the unemployment rate tapers down, then the benefit tapers down. So we've got to reinvent the safety net. And also, I think there's a new approach that is going to start modernizing the employer-based healthcare system. I started this a number of years ago. I said, look, it made sense for the 1940s when we had wage and price controls, but we're going to need alternatives. We're going to need a more flexible kind of approach, and I'm on the Emergency Health Care Guarantee Act right now to cover people's out-of-pocket because they're getting hit so hard now that they've lost their job and they've lost their health care coverage with their employer.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Israel, we have just about a minute and a half, by the way, before we're going to hit a hard break. Israel was down to the point where they had no detectable cases, or very few, over a several-week period. And so Netanyahu said, okay, we're going to reopen our schools. 2 weeks later, an explosion. Now the country's back in lockdown. 47% of the total cases now that they've been able to identify came out of the schools. And we're going to reopen our schools?
Well, Betsy DeVos, of course, is just looking to please Trump. I mean, we've always understood that. But I'll tell you, I think as we look out across the country, what we're seeing is teachers, particularly a number of them who are older, susceptible to the virus, say, I'm worried about my students, in addition to people who are part of the faculty or part of the teaching group. And so the question is Donald Trump ever going to think about something beyond his immediate interest on that particular day? Because this kind of narcissism really costs people's lives, and it's going to cost students and families and teachers dearly if he insists everybody goes back to school before it's safe.
DeVos over the weekend on the TV shows was fairly clear that she has no plan. It was basically the same thing Trump is saying: do whatever your local community thinks is best. Is Congress going to create a plan?
Well, number one, what the Trump people are proposing with respect to the schools simply isn't legal. They cannot just say, we're going to confiscate the funds, or we're not going to let them spend them that way, and we're going to go looking for some ideological kind of trophy about privatizing education. Look, we all understand that we want society in Oregon and everywhere else to be as open as possible, consistent with safety. And Donald Trump is always rejecting the public health guidelines. It's just a challenge to get him even to wear a mask when he goes to see vets. And so what I'm saying is, you bet, we're going to agree as Democrats to focus on needs, but we're also going to focus on safety.
Senator Wyden, Senator Ron Wyden, thanks so much for being with us, sir.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Great talking with you. We'll be right back. Let me just recap some of the statistics that I was just going over with Senator Wyden. And my question for this hour, by the way, will Americans reject Donald Trump and the GOP death cult this fall? And I will get into that rant in about 4 minutes. But these are just some of the many, many issues that are facing people like Senator Wyden as Mitch McConnell continues to try to play political games, basically, with the lives of American people. 5.4 million Americans have lost their health care. If that is not an advertisement for Medicare for all, I don't know what is. I mean, in Texas alone, the number of uninsured jumped from 4.2 million to 4.9 million, leaving 3 out of every 10 Texans uninsured. This is from the New York Times. In the 37 states that expanded Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, 23% of laid-off workers became uninsured, although they're eligible now for Medicaid, presumably. The percentage was nearly double that, 43%, in the 13 states that did not expand Medicaid, including Texas, Florida, and North Carolina. I mean, that is how bad it's getting. And meanwhile, Senator Wyden visited a drive-through. In fact, this was the one question I forgot to ask him, was whether he got himself tested. He visited, Multnomah County is the county that is, the Portland area here. And he went down and visited our county's drive-through testing site. It's in Gresham, which is one of our suburbs, yesterday. Today's Tuesday, right? Yeah, yesterday. After a while, the days kind of run together, don't they? Anyhow, Wyden says, he's got some very, very clear priorities on this thing. And He has asked, for example, the Senate Committee on Finance to hold hearings on systemic racism in healthcare and identify policies to improve health outcomes for Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. In a July 7 letter, Wyden and his colleagues raised concern about federal guidance that allows insurance plans and group health plans to deny claims for COVID-19 tests and other related services, in apparent violation of Congress's legislative intent in the CARES Act. Let's see here. Yeah, they wrote, with COVID-19 cases skyrocketing and our testing capacity nowhere near where it needs to be, it is unacceptable that this administration's priority seems to be giving insurance companies loopholes instead of getting people the free testing they need. We believe this guidance is contrary to statute and urge you to take immediate action to clarify the obligations of group health plans and insurers to provide robust and comprehensive coverage of COVID-19 testing. I mean, this is Wyden expressed frustration over the delay in residents accessing federal unemployment benefits. Yeah. I mean, this is just nuts. But then on top of that, Trump is sending his forces, literally. I mean, he's sending federal police forces, Border Patrol people, into Portland, Oregon, to shoot at Oregonians and put one of them in the hospital with a fractured skull and bone fractures all over the front of his face. And Donald Trump says, oh, this is a very successful intervention. If this is the new normal, America is in for a really rough ride. We'll be back. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Hey, we have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who support our program. It's astonishing. Just think about this. This year alone, with this one source of revenue, according to Senator Bernie Sanders, quote, this year alone, we could fund tuition-free college for all, eliminate child hunger, ensure clean drinking water for every American household, build 500,000 affordable housing units, provide face masks for everybody, produce the protective gear and medical supplies our health workers need for the pandemic, and fully fund the U.S. Post Office. Now, what is this magical thing that we could do that would produce enough money to do all these things? Fund the Internal Revenue Service. Republicans have cut its funding so badly since 2010 that fully a third of their enforcement is no longer happening. And tax cheats have walked off. They're basically refusing to pay over $260 billion in taxes this year. You can hear the whole thing over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And it's just, every now and then I'm just like speechless. I try to figure out how to phrase this. Here's a very simple phrase. The Trump administration is a death cult. They revel in their efforts to end Obamacare and cut millions of Americans off health care. They celebrate last night's resumption of federal executions. They enthusiastically authorize the use of formerly banned pesticides that cause cancer and neurological damage to children. Trump's first official action was to allow coal and oil companies to dump more waste in our rivers, poisoning people downstream. As children were being slaughtered in classrooms across America, Trump doubled down on his support of the NRA. As black people across America continue to be regularly murdered by the police, Trump calls those asking for change terrorists and thugs. He refers to Nazis as very fine people and retweets calls for white power. Over international objections and in violation of U.S. law, Trump is selling weapons to Saudi Arabia to continue bombing civilians in Yemen. Numerous children have died in Trump's detention facilities, yet they continue to give millions of dollars to Trump's contributor corporations to continue holding these children in deplorable, disgusting conditions. Trump is fighting all efforts to extend more unemployment relief to American families. The entire Republican Party, for that matter, is fighting this. In fact, the entire Republican Party has been on board with every single thing I've mentioned, further stressing out people in ways that inevitably, history tells us, lead to domestic violence and suicide. Simple fact is that Donald Trump and the people he has surrounded himself with, like Chief Racist Stephen Miller, appear to love causing other people pain. Trump even encouraged police to rough up people who have not yet been convicted of a crime. Told his followers if they injured protesters, he'd pay their legal expenses. But their crowning achievement? That's the coronavirus. Just by discouraging people from wearing masks or social distancing, just by raising doubts about science and scientists, Donald Trump and his buddies have caused the deaths of over 100,000 Americans, with more dead bodies to come as they continue on this path. Trump goes to states with massive COVID outbreaks and holds huge indoor rallies, knowing that it's going to lead to the death of many of the people attending. Just think about that for a minute. What is he thinking as he is standing out there looking at his little crowd, knowing that some of those people who are smiling and holding signs and loving him so much in 3, 4, 5 weeks will be dead because they showed up at his event? Just because of his desperate need for adulation. What is he thinking as he's looking at dead men and women walking? Trump refuses to use the Defense Production Act to ramp up our stockpiles of testing kits or personal protective equipment. In Arizona and Florida now, they're having to reuse or use for day after day after day PPE, masks, gowns. This is making the situation in the states that are, where the virus is exploding, a death-dealing crisis for the people who are trying to save lives. Betsy DeVos, who spent her whole life trying to destroy public schooling, is joining with Trump in trying to punish public school teachers and families who send their kids to public school by bringing disease and death into their homes. Of course, wealthy white families that send their kids to private schools. The private schools have top-of-the-line in-home instruction. None of this had to happen. All over the world, country after country have responded to the coronavirus in ways that have actually defeated it. New Zealand hasn't had a case in weeks, and normalcy has largely returned to that nation. Taiwan, similarly, almost beat the virus. They've had days where there's not a single new case. They recently had a baseball game with over 10,000 people in attendance. Everybody wore masks. But the virus level was so low, there was no spike as a result of that game. All over Europe, countries have kept their unemployment rates below 10% by aggressive government actions. In Scandinavia, it's under 7%. And they've beaten the virus through extensive testing and contact tracing and mandating masks and social distancing. Over at the New York Times, Paul Krugman asks a simple question. He says, at its most severe, the lockdown seems to have reduced GDP by a little over 10%. During World War II, America spent more than 30% of GDP on defense for more than 3 years. Why couldn't we absorb a much smaller cost for even a few months? The answer, of course, is that Donald Trump has no interest in saving American lives. He and his Republican buddies just want average Americans to get back to work so that Trump and his billionaire friends and donors can get even richer, no matter how many workers die in the process. Trump appears to delight in knowing that he and his party have opposed expanding America's social safety net for decades. There's an almost endless supply of poor and low-income people desperate enough for a paycheck that they'll take their lives in their hands to feed their families. The Trump administration is a death cult. The Republican Party has become a death cult. And Americans and their children are overwhelmingly not enthusiastic about dying. I'll get into that in a few minutes. So my question, will November bring the kind of necessary change to put an end to unnecessary death as a routine part of American life? You think?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And what roles can you and I play in helping make that happen? We'll be back after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. This is a book that was written back in the late 90s, but it's still very, very timely. This is from the second chapter titled Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the LA Rebellion, we should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater, white shirt, and black tie, how his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. That, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anybody caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that the hoods had gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal, intra-class combat for much less than that, though because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systemic way, wage war on the pigs, or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone, and of his own accord, would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question in the form of a whimpering request, can't we just all get along? The fact of the matter is, we are getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos are getting along just fine. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave, with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist troll, was that a race riot was going on, as if we had all begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His handlers compelled him to send up a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interests and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him, and by extension, us. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development, aka history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments and violently forced into Euro-American history. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, as a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, some open and hostile. But all of these have been open to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been some bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, there have also been reactionary neo-colonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements, and none collectively ever materialize. Because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we'll remain a minority within the American system as opposed to a majority in our own, and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e. colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president. And absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeois is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Jackson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well-read, have traveled in our experience. They've just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color. As a designation of our national identity, it has played out. It is a superficial understanding at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people or a state. The book is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur.
Americans stop the Republican Party and their billionaire buddies before another 100,000 Americans die from COVID-19? Dr. Michael Mann is here, and I'm asking him about the new climate models that are projecting even more extreme warming. Are they correct? Remington Gregg, the Council for Public Citizen, joins me on how the coronavirus continues to spread, yet there are no enforceable health standards coming out of this administration. Also, Chloe Waterman with Friends of the Earth drops by on how we stop meatpacking plants from killing us. Find The Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Remember Russell Honore, General Russell Honore? I believe he's a lieutenant general, and I think that's 2 stars. He was the 2nd Infantry Division's commander in South Korea, and he's most famous for running Joint Task Force Katrina. After the initial response to, Brownie's initial response not only failed, but led to the death of almost 2,000 American citizens in New Orleans. He was the Vice Director of Operations J3 for the Joint Staff in D.C. He was the Deputy Commanding General at the U.S. Army Infantry Center and School at Fort Benning. This guy's been around. He knows what he's doing. He's now retired. He just tweeted out, and this is just incredible. He tweets, Jesus Christ, comma, will someone, maybe Sean Hannity, explain to number 45 to stop saying ignorant, and then he uses the S word, I'll say poop, like more testing, creating more COVID-19 cases? This is effing embarrassing for the man with the nuclear code saying stupid S word like this. Sad thing we have few governors believe the same S word. I mean, talk about seriously PO'd. So what do we do with Trump and these people? Well, in Italy, they've got an idea. None of this Truth and Reconciliation Committee, stuff, this let's feel good stuff, let's be nice to each other like South Africa did after the end of apartheid. Instead, the Italians are going for justice. This started out on Facebook with a Facebook group called Noi Denunceremo. We will denounce. And it's a Facebook group that started out as a place where, it's an Italian Facebook group, it's all in Italian language. It started out as a place where families who didn't have an opportunity to have a funeral could memorialize their dead relatives. And it turned from, Nicole Winfield, by the way, writing about this for the Associated Press, it turned from that into what Winfield describes as an influential activist group that is providing a steady stream of testimony and evidence to prosecutors investigating whether any crimes contributed to Italy's COVID-19 death toll. They filed 100 new cases yesterday with prosecutors in Bergamo who are investigating the outbreak. The co-founder of the group, Stefano Fusco, says, "We simply tell our stories and ask the prosecutors to investigate about what happened here and why. There was such a huge massacre. Now, Italy had what, 23,000 dead, as I recall, something in that neighborhood? We're at 130,000 plus. They tell the stories of mothers and fathers taken away by ambulance and never seen alive again by their children, of frantic efforts to locate vacant intensive care unit beds, hospitals so overwhelmed trying to save the living that relatives of the dead were just afterthought. Members of the group assert that the failure of regional and national political leaders to seal off virus-afflicted areas of Bergamo and Brescia early on allowed the contagion to spread throughout Lombardy and overwhelm its healthcare system, eventually leading to the West's first nationwide lockdown. They've gone even farther than this. They're not just trying to prosecute the Italian government for failing to do their job in local courts, in state courts, or their equivalent of states, regional courts, and in federal courts. But simultaneous with yesterday's filing, We Will Denounce, this is the group that has grown out of this Italian language Facebook page, We Will Denounce sent a letter asking the European Commission and the European Court of Human Rights to supervise the Italian investigation. They don't trust their own government to supervise an investigation of their own government. Gee, surprise. It's like trusting Bill Barr to investigate the Department of Justice. They are alleging specifically that crimes against humanity were involved, and specifically that Italian citizens' right to life and dignity were violated. Now, I don't think we have the word dignity in our Constitution, but we certainly have the word life in our Declaration of Independence. We call it life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then, this article, Associated Press, you can track it down. The headline is Families of Italy's Virus Dead Seek Answers, Solace, and Justice. It's over on the apnews.com website. How do we prosecute Donald Trump and the members of his administration for 130,000 dead Americans? How do we bring them to justice? What's it going to take? And I mean, let's not kid ourselves. I raised a bunch of these issues with Senator Wyden. I think, one of the most important is what happened in Israel, because this just happened, right? May 17th. This is an article from the Daily Beast by Noga Tarnopolsky. On May 17 in Israel, it appeared the virus was not only under control, but defeated. Israel reported only 10 new cases of COVID-19 in the entire country on May 17th. They had been in almost total lockdown for 2 months. So on May 17, Benjamin Netanyahu decreed, I'll read you the line from the Daily Beast, quote, Netanyahu's decree that the entire school system would reopen was a political flourish to signal everything was under control. This is a country of 9 million people. They were down to 10 cases. We're going to open the schools back up because, I, Netanyahu, have everything under control. Another strongman government, another decree from the top down. Another statement by a politician instead of a scientist. And then, what happened? Well, as Haggai Levine, an epidemiologist at the Brown School of Public Health and Community Medicine at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, said, quote, contrary to our advice, gee, is that familiar? Right-wing politician ignoring the advice of scientists. Contrary to our advice, the government decided to open the entire school system all at once on May 17. What happened next was entirely predictable. 2 weeks after schools opened, on June 3rd, more than 244 students and staff were found to test positive for COVID-19. A week later, 2,026 students, teachers, and staff have contracted COVID-19, and 28,147 people are in quarantine. In just the first 2 weeks of July, 393 kindergartens and schools open for summer programs had to be closed. Not 393 students, 393 schools were closed because COVID was burning through their schools. Israel's rate, this is on July 2nd. Eric Fingelding, an epidemiologist and health economist at the Federation of American Scientists, tweeted a chart showing Israel's rate of infection surging past Europe and fast approaching the disastrous rate in the United States. By the way, this is how they refer to the United States in news reports all around the world. The disastrous situation in the United States. Israel was fast approaching the disastrous rate in the U.S., noting it was exactly 1 month since the reopening of Israeli schools. Remember the day that the Monday after Memorial Day weekend, I came on here and I said 1 month from now? And that's not the schools. Uli Kleiner, the Health Ministry's Deputy Director of Public Health Services, this is for the whole country of Israel, said 47% of all the new infections in Israel from May 17th, 47, back when there was only 10 new infections in the entire country, May 17th, that was the day Netanyahu said, we're opening our schools. They did the next week. He says 47% of all of them were infections acquired in the schools. And the vast majority of the rest of them, obviously, are infections from people who were infected by people in the schools. You know, Trump and his buddies, they love to talk about Israel. Isn't Israel wonderful? Isn't, Netanyahu's a wonderful guy. Let's clamp down harder on those Palestinians in Gaza, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But suddenly they're not talking. I'm not hearing anything about the wonderful Israeli experiment in the right-wing media. Are you? The Republican Party is a death cult. Bringing death and disease to a school, to a business, to a family near you. What do we do about this?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Under what laws can we prosecute people in the Trump administration? I mean, they're literally causing death. And welcome back 15 minutes before the hour. And let's see here. Jania, if I'm saying that right, in Charlotte, North Carolina?
Yeah, you always say my name right. Hey, Tom, how are you?
Hi. Great. Nice to hear from you again. What's up?
Well, you know what? You hit it right on the head for me. That's my question, and I want to pose this to you and also to any of the listeners. What can we do as our average citizens? Do we start with the local first administration and then work our way up to do a class action lawsuit? Like, what are our rights? How can we stop this? I am a concerned parent, and we are not prepared. Our hospitals are almost at their brink, and they're not set up to even take in kids. I mean, can you imagine, if our kids were to get sick, and also even with a shutdown, we're not prepared, and Trump's not helping with the PPEs. I mean, what happens when our schools open up? I don't know. So what can we do?
It's a really, really good question. And, technically, most school districts in most states have the power to basically call the police and come to your house and get your kid and take them to school. and charge you as being a bad parent. I mean, this has been the case. We have compulsory education in the United States. This has been the case since the early, I think since the 1920s. But, this is Horace Mann's big sales pitch back in the 1890s. But I would be surprised if any of that gets enforced, Jania. I'm guessing that what you're going to see, and some of the numbers here, this is from the Axios newsletter this morning. They asked parents, are you afraid of sending your kids to school? The total percentage of Americans, this was a study of 219 parents of children under the age of 18. The total number of Americans who say that there is a large or moderate risk to sending their kids to school was 71%. 82% of Democrats say that, 53% of Republicans say that. Breaking it down, 89% of black people say it's too big a risk. Hispanic people, 80%. White people, 64%. I'm guessing that what's going to happen, and you add that to the fact that you've got a lot of teachers who are over 40. And I'm guessing that what's going to happen is that, even in those places where they open the schools, you're going to have half the kids or more not showing up. They're going to stay at home. They're going to, learn from home, whatever. They're going to do whatever they have to do. And probably more than half of the teachers aren't going to show up. And frankly, I think this is part of Betsy DeVos's plan to destroy public schools, because she's shoveling money at private schools. And the wealthier private schools have online instruction down. And she's not requiring private schools to open back up, to the best of my knowledge, just public schools. Wow. And this is going to kill off teachers. And it's going to punish the parents of kids who are in public schools. So that's what I think is going to happen, Janae.
Well, thank you, Tom. If I find out anything, I will definitely spread it.
Great. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the call, and thank you for watching us on Free Speech TV. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. So back in 2016, the election year, Donald Trump was not yet president. He was just running a scam university, Trump University. That year, and Barack Obama was president, that year, Corinthian Colleges and ITT Technical Institute, two scam for-profit colleges, went out of business and ended up leaving thousands, maybe tens of thousands of students just basically screwed. No degree, no job, and massive amounts of student debt. So President Obama and the Secretary of Education put together this plan. It's called the Borrower Defense Rule, that said that if somebody got ripped off by one of these for-profit colleges, they didn't have to pay back the debt. If it was student debt that was issued by the federal government, we would just eat it as a country. They were the victims of fraud. Well, it turns out Betsy DeVos had other ideas. She came into office, of course, just months afterwards, as Donald Trump was sworn into office, and she's been fighting it all the way. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com and our new video for supporters of our program. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with a hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It seems that Americans are pushing back. Well, I'll get into this in a little bit. I should be picking up your phone calls. My apologies. Let's see here. Kelly in Elmwood, Illinois. Hey, Kelly, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Just to let you know real quick, you're a hero of mine, no doubt about that. I'd like to share a story with you. As soon as coronavirus hit, about 2 weeks after, my wife's a social worker. I don't want to say the name of the company, but it's a very well-known company. They wasted no time. 3 weeks into it, they let her go. It just said they eliminated the 5 people in this position, and they just completely let her go. She did get a small severance package, but not much. Ever since then, we've been really struggling. Me, myself, I'm on disability. because I have shark coats. We have been struggling ever since. Now, regarding to the people that $600 is too much, my God, really? That's too much? We barely get by on that because we own a home. Now, what's so scary is Congress, I don't know how Mitch McConnell stays in position. I never knew how. I still don't know how. Why Democrats don't scream from their lungs that the Republicans don't want to give average citizens, middle-class citizens that contribute to society every single day the $600. I don't know why Democrats don't scream. They're giving big billions to big business, but when it comes to me, the average guy trying to live the American dream and moving a home, nothing. $600 is too much. $600. Right. And now they're waiting. You informed me of this. I think they're out on recess, and maybe they have 5 days to negotiate this. Talk about biting your nails. I'm waiting for them to see what happens, and all this is last minute. If something doesn't happen stimulus-wise, we will lose our home. There's no doubt in my mind we will lose our home. And we lived here for 15
Kelly,
years.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Well, I have a feeling I'm not. There's many people in this boat. I listen to you every day. I think there's bad days ahead of us. I really do. So right now, what we're forced to do, Tom, is we're forced to sell our home. And since my wife lost her job, we can relocate now. As a social worker, nobody's going to hire social workers right now. Nobody. There's just no way. They cut just to eliminate that position because it's not a moneymaker. But anyways, the future is so bleak. And with COVID on top of that, losing your home, the stress of counting your pennies, it's immense. And people aren't only cracking because of COVID, they're cracking because of all this. Every bit of it. Mm-hmm. And, Tom, I have to repeat myself. I don't know how Republicans get away with this. You know, it's always hate someone. You know, someone's going to take your job. Someone's going to kill you. They're packing their guns to come and get you. It's always scare tactics with that party. It's never about jobs. It's never about strengthening middle class. Never. And one real quick thing I think you should do, because I loved when you did this, and you convinced my brother to go from Republican to Democrat because of this. You used to challenge people to come on your radio show to say, give me one law created and passed by Republicans and pushed forward that favors the middle class. And not one.
In the last 40 years.
Forward. Last 40. I wish you would say that every day. You actually convinced my brother of that one thing because he tried to prove you wrong, and we both investigated it. I said to my brother, it's not going to happen. This Thom Hartmann knows what he's saying. He's a sponge of information, and he listens to you now. But I wish that would resonate. That what I just said, and Democrats that even come on your show, they should inject every time they're on TV and on radio, even if it's not the topic, that Republicans don't want to give you a red cent. You are on your own. Meanwhile, these big companies are doing well right now. The stock market's doing well. The 40 million people are out of work. And, very last thing, I hate to say this about my fellow American. Where's the empathy? Where is the empathy for your fellow man? It's almost like you're on your own. I don't got coronavirus, so you're on your own, I need to wear a mask because my family's healthy. I'm healthy, too. I've been tested, but I wear my mask almost constantly, definitely when I'm around people, because I know it helps my fellow man, my fellow citizen. This is something we have to do together. And you know what? That's crumbling. And why is it crumbling? In my honest opinion, because of the man in the White House, he does this. It's divide and conquer. He does it well. It's not about strengthening the middle class. Bringing back jobs from China, didn't do. Repealing Obamacare, didn't do. Strengthening Medicare, didn't do. Strengthening Social Security, didn't do. Build the wall, didn't do. What does it take to tell you you're being, I call them Trump chumps, you're being bamboozled by this guy? They just don't get it. It's so sad that one man can create all this destruction.
Well, it's not just one man, Kelly. The Republican Party has been working on this thing for 40 years. And they've had more than a little bit of help from a few Democrats along the way, but all of your points are so well made. You're a good man, Kelly, and thank you for sharing your story. Keep us up to date on how you're doing. And I'm so sorry to hear that you are so close to the edge. I know that it's a fate shared by millions of Americans. And
thank
it's a
you. I
terrible
love you,
thing.
Tom.
Kelly,
I
thank
do.
you. Yeah, back at you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at raycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps Hair Loss Treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Michael Lewis's new book, The Fifth Risk. And this is from the prologue, which is titled Lost in Transition. Chris Christie noticed a piece in the New York Times. That's how it all started. The New Jersey governor had dropped out of the presidential race in February 2016 and thrown what support he had behind Donald Trump. In late April, he saw the article. It described meetings between representatives of the remaining candidates still in the race: Trump, John Kasich, Ted Cruz, Hillary Clinton, and Bernie Sanders, and the Obama White House. Anybody who still had any kind of shot at becoming president of the United States apparently needed to start preparing to run the federal government. The guy Trump sent to the meeting was, in Christie's estimations, comically underqualified. Christie called up Trump's campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, to ask why this critical job hadn't been handed to someone who actually knew something about government. Lewandowski said, "We don't have anyone." Christie volunteered himself for the job, head of the Donald Trump presidential transition team. "It's the next best thing to being president," he told friends. "You get to plan the presidency." He went to see Trump about it. Trump said he didn't want a presidential transition team. Why did anyone need to plan anything before he actually became president? "It's legally required," said Christie. Trump asked where the money was going to come from to pay for the transition team. Christie explained that Trump could either pay for it himself or take it out of campaign funds. Trump didn't want to pay for it himself, and he didn't want to take it out of campaign funds either, but he agreed grudgingly that Christie could go ahead and raise a separate fund to pay for his transition team. But not too much, he said. And so Christie set out to prepare for the unlikely event that Donald Trump would one day be elected president of the United States. Not everyone in Trump's campaign was happy to see him on the job. In June, Christie received a note from Trump advisor Paul Manafort. "The kid is paranoid about you," Manafort said. The kid was Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law. Back in 2005, when he was U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey, Christie had prosecuted and jailed Kushner's father, Charles, for tax fraud. Christie's investigation revealed in the bargain that Charles Kushner had hired a prostitute to seduce his own brother-in-law, whom he suspected of cooperating with Christie, had videotaped the sexual encounter and sent the tape to his sister. The Kushners apparently took their grudges seriously. and Christie sensed that Jared still harbored one against him. On the other hand, Trump, whom Christie considered almost a friend, couldn't have cared less. He'd invited Christie to his and Melania's wedding, and he pressed him to attend his daughter Ivanka and Jared Kushner's wedding. That would be awkward, said Christie. I'm paying for the wedding, and I don't give an S, said Donald. Christie viewed Jared as one of those people who thinks that because he's rich, he must also be smart. Still, he had a certain cunning about him. And Christie soon found himself reporting everything he did to prepare for a Trump administration to an executive committee. The committee consisted of Jared, Ivanka Trump, Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump, Paul Manafort, Steve Mnuchin, and Jeff Sessions. I'm kind of like the church elder who double counts the collection plate every Sunday for the pastor, said Sessions, who appeared uncomfortable with the entire situation. The elder's job became more complicated in July 2016 when Trump was formally named the Republican nominee. The transition team now moved into an office in downtown Washington, D.C. and went looking for people to occupy the top 500 jobs in the federal government. They needed to fill all of the cabinet positions, of course, but also a whole bunch of others that no one in the Trump campaign even knew existed. It's not obvious how you find the next Secretary of State, much less the next Secretary of Transportation. Never mind who should sit on the Board of Trustees of the Barry Goldwater Scholarship and Excellence in Education Foundation. By August, 130 people were showing up every day, and hundreds more working part-time at Trump Transition headquarters at the corner of 17th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue. The transition team made lists of likely candidates for all 500 jobs, plus other lists of informed people to roll into the various federal agencies the day after the election to be briefed on whatever the federal agencies were doing. They gathered the names for these lists by traveling the country and talking to people, Republicans who had served in government, Trump's closest advisors, recent occupants of the jobs that needed filling. Then they set about investigating any candidates for glaring flaws and embarrassing secrets and conflicts of interest. At the end of each week, Christie handed over binders with lists of names of people who might do the job well to Jared and Donald and Eric and the others. They probed everything, says a senior Trump transition official. Who is this person? Where did this person come from? They only ever rejected one person, Paul Manafort's secretary. The first time Donald Trump paid attention to any of this was when he read about it in the newspaper. The story revealed that Trump's very own transition team, led by New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, had raised several $1 million to pay for its own staff. The moment he saw it, Trump called Steve Bannon, the chief executive of his campaign, from his office on the 26th floor of the Trump Tower and told him to come immediately to his residence many floors above. Bannon stepped off the elevator to find the governor of New Jersey seated on a sofa, being hollered at. Trump was apoplectic, actually yelling, "You're stealing my money! You're stealing my effing money! What the F is this?" Seeing Bannon, Trump turned on him and screamed, "Why are you letting him steal my effing money?" Bannon and Christie together set out to explain to Trump federal law. Months, and it continues from there. The book is The Fifth Risk by Michael Lewis.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I'm proud to say that I am a subscriber to the newsletter that my old colleague and friend David Sirota produces, TMI. He's a journalist. He's the editor-at-large at Jacobin Magazine. He's the author of 3 books, the former senior advisor to the Bernie Sanders presidential campaign. DavidSirota.com is his website where you can find out about his newsletter. And you can tweet him, of course, at David Sirota. David, welcome back to the program. Great to have you with us. You've been writing about how the 1% are cheating us out of $250 billion in taxes every year. Riff on this.
Yeah, there's a new government report that came out from the Congressional Budget Office, which found that between 2011 and 2013, $381 billion of taxes went unpaid every single year. Now, if you combine that finding, which just came out at the end of last week, with a recent Harvard University study that showed the top 1% are responsible for about 70% of that tax gap, you get the full picture. That every single year, the top 1% are not paying about $250 billion of taxes that they owe, but that go, again, unpaid. So we're not talking about, higher or lower taxes, which tax rates. We're talking about just the taxes that are owed. $250 billion a year is not being paid, taxes that are owed to the U.S. government by the top 1%. And if you start thinking about what that $250 billion could pay for, it starts to get, kind of mind-boggling here. I mean, $250 billion, Bernie Sanders, who requested that Congressional Budget Office study, put it this way. He said, with the money that these tax cheats owe this year alone, we could fund tuition-free college for all, eliminate child hunger, ensure clean drinking water for every American household, build 500,000 affordable housing units, provide masks to everybody, produce the protective and medical supplies our healthcare workers need to combat the pandemic, and fully fund the U.S. Postal Service. That's just with the money, again, that the top 1% owes but doesn't pay in taxes every single year.
I recall during the Reagan administration and the first Bush administration, there was a lot of talk about the evil IRS and all this kind of stuff. But correct me if I'm wrong, my recollection is that it was really during the George W. Bush administration that they aggressively started the defunding of the Internal Revenue Service. And that in the first weeks of the Trump administration, or maybe the first months, they announced that they were offering early retirement to as many as I recall, the number that's in my head, and again, this is from memory, David, my apologies, but is that they offered 15,000 out of 57,000 workers. Now, I might be mixing this up with Social Security Administration, early retirement. So basically, what's happened is that the IRS is down. This is classic starve the beast. Reagan's, David Stockman's strategy. The IRS is down to the point where they almost can't do anything about this. In fact, they're more frequently auditing the returns of people who have an earned income tax credit. In other words, the government gives them money because their income is so low. People are making under $20,000 a year. They're more frequently auditing those returns than they are the returns of very wealthy people. And I realize there's fewer wealthy people, but you know what I'm talking about. I'm not saying necessarily in absolute numbers. As a percentage, you're more likely to be audited if you're poor, basically.
And that is a reflection of the budget situation that you outlined. There have been massive budget cuts to the IRS. That's absolutely true over the last about 10 years. And it costs more per audit to audit the super rich and ultimately process a civil or a criminal case against the super rich than it does to audit the poor, because the super rich are using complex tax schemes and have armies of lawyers. I should mention corporations as well, auditing corporations. So you have a situation where massive budget cuts have driven down the audit rates of corporations and the wealthy to the point where poor people are being audited as frequently or even more frequently as the super rich, even though most of the money in unpaid taxes in aggregate is coming from or would be owed by the top 1%. And here's a stat about what's gone on in the Trump administration, which we reported on at TMI, which is that over the last 5 years, the Trump Justice Department has been prosecuting far fewer criminal cases referred by the IRS. So those are potentially should be prosecuted, referred to the DOJ. 66% fewer criminal prosecutions off of IRS referrals in the last 5 years under Trump.
It's mind-boggling. And then you add to that the fact that for every dollar spent on enforcement by the Internal Revenue Service, multiples, and I don't have that number in front of me, perhaps you do, but for every dollar we spend, we get a hell of a lot more than $1 back. And yet the Republicans and some Democrats have, for the better part of 40 years, been cutting the budget of the IRS.
Yes, I mean, in the CBO report, I don't have the numbers exactly in front of me, but what they basically say is tax enforcement is one of those things where if you spend money, you actually gain more money back. In other words, spending on rebuilding the IRS's enforcement budget actually isn't just deficit neutral. It actually increases revenue to the federal government because you're ending up being able to collect the taxes that are actually owed. Now, look, Trump has put forward most recently a budget that puts a little bit more money into enforcement. But the experts basically say that this needs to be a multi-year rebuilding of this agency. And again, the costs are just enormous. I mean, $250 billion a year, I mean, that is astronomical amounts of money that are effectively being stolen by the super rich, every single year. I mean, that's the other part. $250 billion every single year. That is not small change. That is a huge amount of money.
Right. It's mind-boggling. Are there any efforts to do anything about this anywhere in our government, David Sirota?
Well, I mean, look, there have been some progressives who have been pushing for a higher spending on enforcement. That was what the whole CBO study was about, which is that if you put money into enforcement, you will gain more revenue back. But again, you're going to have an army of corporate lobbyists and those kinds of folks who don't really want the IRS to
Aren't Republicans really sane in fighting any effort to expand or to rebuild the IRS? I mean, let's be clear, it's been torn apart. Aren't the Republicans saying, by opposing any efforts to put the IRS back into place, that they are just nakedly, openly, right up front, proud, waving the flag of, we are the politicians who are the pets of, the wholly owned subsidiaries of, the toadies of the billionaire class, period, full stop, and to hell with everybody else in America?
Well, what they basically set up is a self-reinforcing ideology that doesn't make them admit essentially what you just said. What they basically said is, for the last 10 years, a lot of the rhetoric was the IRS, as you suggested, is sort of this overzealous, monstrous agency, and therefore we need to pare it back. We need to limit the IRS, and that justified the budget cuts. Now, fast forward to today, and what you often hear from the Republicans is, oh, well, look, we can't afford it. Maybe we've cut too far. Maybe the budgets of these agencies has been cut too much. But you know what? Now we've got a big deficit, so now we can't afford it. That assumes, of course, that the public won't understand that, again, investing in the IRS is one of those investments where you end up gaining more revenue. But the Republicans have created a kind of circular logic that says that they can use the deficit to justify continued cutting.
Well, they use the deficit to justify everything. It's an old trick. Right. David Sirota, check out his website, davidsirota.com. Subscribe to his newsletter. Read the just incredible journalistic work that David has been doing his entire life, but in particular more recently, davidsirota.com. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Tom.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 15 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, your media support group for We the People. Back with more of your calls and the news of the day right after this. And welcome back. Jim in Boise, Idaho. Hey, Jim, RICO statues?
Yeah, Tom. Could you explain a little bit of it and then tell me if you think that there's some correlation between it and the whole Republican Party, and especially Trump?
Yeah. Back in the 60s, there was this real problem. Prior to 1961, J. Edgar Hoover, who was mobbed up, he was being blackmailed by Santos Trafficante and Carlos Marcello. They knew that he was gay, and Clyde and he used to go down to Hialeah every year, and Trafficante would give him money to gamble and bring him male prostitutes and things like that. He was denying that there was such a thing as organized crime in the United States. The peak of prosecution of the mafia was, I believe, 13 people in 1 year during the 50s and 60s when J. Edgar Hoover was head of the FBI. Bobby Kennedy came in as Attorney General in January of 1961, and that year, 1961, there were over 700 prosecutions of the mob. And one of the ways that they did this is they got, and I'm not sure exactly when this legislation was passed, so the timeline may not line up perfectly, but they passed this piece of legislation called the Racketeering Influence Corrupt Practices Act, RICO, Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organization, excuse me. O stands for organizations. And it was specifically designed to target the mafia, because the mafia was operating in ways where people wouldn't actually literally say, go kill Ralph. They would say things, because he's a bad guy, he's a turncoat. They would say things like, gee, maybe Ralph will stumble on the sidewalk, or, whatever. I mean, they talked in code, they behaved in, the ways that Michael Cohen says Donald Trump does. And so what this act did was basically gave police agencies a set of tools to go after the mafia. And they did. And the RICO laws were used very effectively against the mob throughout the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, or at least the very early 80s. And I'm not sure if they still are now or not. And, but the mob largely had their back broken as a result of those efforts that Bobby Kennedy started. Those laws are still on the books. The problem with using those laws against people like Donald Trump or, people in his administration or businesses associated with him is that those laws were so tightly written, so clearly targeted, specifically to the Italian mafia, that they've had a problem in some cases using them against things like gangs, which are, arguably operating like mafia-like organizations. And it's a real challenge to use them against government officials. What we need is a 21st century version of the RICO laws that can be used against corrupt politicians and against billionaires and corporations that corrupt those politicians. But I'm not holding my breath. That would have to get through the Senate, with Mitch McConnell in it. But it's the kind of thing that I think we should be pushing for if we get control of the House, Senate, and the White House in November. Make sense?
Just to backtrack a little bit, wasn't Frank Church part of that investigation or not?
Yes. Oh, he absolutely was. The Senator Frank Church, I believe he was from, wherever he was from. I don't want to get it wrong.
He's from Idaho.
In any case, yes. Say that again?
He's from Idaho. He's one of the better politicians.
Idaho, yeah. I was going to say, I thought he was from Idaho, and you're from Boise. I thought he was from Idaho. I almost said Utah, too. In any case, they were called the Church Committee investigations. He was the senator who was looking into all that stuff that Nixon was doing. So, yes, Frank Church was a real hero in this. And I believe he was a Republican.
Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at ThomHartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So over at ThomHartmann.com, we just put up a new video for our supporters, the people who support our program, that talks about Malcolm X saying, if you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are oppressed and loving the people who are the oppressors. He said that 55 years ago to, this month, February, in 1965. And, what that actually means, how that warning from Malcolm X was apparently taken to heart by the Republican Party in 1981 through the Reagan presidency. And we actually saw this shift in America to the point where, that led to everything. Stop and frisk and the demonization of homeless people and the demonization of poor people and black people and Muslim people and all of this stuff came out of this very specific kind of Lee Atwater strategy in the 1980s. So you can find it over at ThomHartmann.com and check it out.
Welcome back. I just said that Frank Church, I thought he was a Republican. He wasn't. He was a Democrat. Frank Church was the anti-corruption guy, senator who went after Nixon. The Church hearings were pretty amazing. Okay, a couple of things that I wanted to share with you. We've been talking about the coronavirus and the cult, the Trump death cult. I'm arguing that this is the GOP death cult, and it goes all the way back to 1981. When Ronald Reagan started deconstructing the New Deal, and not just the New Deal, also the Great Society, started taking apart the rights of unionized workers to unionize. So wages went down among people all across the United States. Reagan and Bush opened the doors to China and Mexico. They negotiated NAFTA. They started a stronger relationship with China to move our manufacturing over there to kill American industry. The George Herbert Walker Bush, of course, finished the negotiations for NAFTA, and yes, Bill Clinton signed it, but it wasn't his bill, it wasn't his idea, it wasn't his legislation. This was a Republican initiative, and continues to be, by the way. It's been Democrats, who like Sherrod Brown and Bernie Sanders, who have been fighting NAFTA from its inception since the 80s. So it's just, the whole Republican death cult thing goes back a long way. They have been fighting the ability of Americans to have health care forever. I mean, Republicans started fighting Democratic efforts to provide single-payer universal health care back in 1947 when Harry Truman proposed it. Over and over and over again, Republicans and conservatives have been fighting the idea that health care should be a right and not a privilege in the United States. It's obscene. It's crazy. But this is part of the Republican death cult. They want to go back to the days when young girls and young women were having back alley abortions and dying from it. Some of us are old enough to actually remember those days. And yes, it really was happening. They want us to go back to executions. Last night, the federal government, you had a 2 a.m. ruling, a 5-4 ruling by the Supreme Court, in which the 5 conservatives said, yeah, put that guy to death. Now, all the evidence is that he really was guilty and he committed a heinous crime, but still, put him to death. Because we're such civilized people here in the United States. I believe we're the only developed country in the world that still executes prisoners. We're certainly the only civilized country in the world where it's legal to hold prisoners in slavery. It is authorized by the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And this death cult that is called the Trump administration has fully embraced that. And they're doing it now not just with people who have been convicted of crimes, but they're doing it now with people who have attempted to seek asylum in the United States because they were going to be murdered, or raped or whatever, tortured in their home countries, and they came here seeking asylum, trying to come to the land of milk and honey, to that shining city on the hill. And now this death cult, this Republican death cult, is bringing us the coronavirus, and it's exploding in the Republican-controlled states. And you've got Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott still refusing to do anything about it. Doug Ducey in Arizona. I mean, in Arizona and in Texas, they still have laws on the books that say that cities can't require people to wear masks. Cities can't. These are the guys who are out there yelling states' rights, local government, when it comes to the right to regulate a woman's right to have an abortion, or when it comes to the right to regulate who can vote and who can't vote, or when it comes to the right to regulate, whether schools are integrated or not. But as soon as somebody says, hey, let's do something to save some lives, oh, no, you don't. You can't do that. It's a death cult. And they're spreading coronavirus like there's no tomorrow with this herd immunity strategy that the Trump administration is pursuing. Check out this study. This study was just published, this article about it in Newsweek. The headline kind of tells the whole thing. Scans reveal heart damage in over half of COVID-19 patients. The study involved 1,216 people in 69 countries. They did echogram on 6 continents. They gave them echocardiograms. It's an ultrasound for the heart. Of the total 1,216 patients, 667, 55%, had abnormalities in their scan, and 1 in 7 participants had what researchers described as severe heart abnormalities. The average age was 62. This is happening to people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, right across the board, after the team excluded patients with existing heart conditions. So they weren't even analyzed, right? If you had a heart condition before you got COVID, you weren't even evaluated. The proportion of abnormal scan results of those with severe cardiac disease was still 55%. This disease is damaging people's hearts, which, by the way, will be a pre-existing condition. And Donald Trump is argued last week, 2 weeks ago, before the U.S. Supreme Court. We didn't get a ruling on that, did we? Argued before the U.S. Supreme Court to blow up Obamacare and bring back the right of a health insurance company to say, no, we won't cover you. You have a pre-existing condition.
Call 202-808-9925.
Pick up your phone calls after the break. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with Speaking the Truth, the multinational corporations that really rather you didn't know.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Medical Apartheid, the Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times to the Present by Harriet A. Washington. This is from the introduction. On a sylvan stretch of New York's patrician Upper Fifth Avenue, just across from the New York Academy of Medicine, a colossus in marble, august inscriptions, and a bas-relief caduceus grace, a memorial bordering Central Park. These laurels venerate the surgeon James Marion Sims, MD, as a selfless benefactor of women. Nor is this the only statuary erected in honor of Dr. Sims. Marble monuments to his skill, benevolence, and humanity guard his native South Carolina's State House, its medical school, the Alabama Capitol grounds, and a French hospital. In the mid-19th century, Dr. Sims dedicated his career to the care and cure of women's disorders and opened the nation's first hospital for women in New York City. He attended French royalty, his Grecian visage inspired oil portraits, and in 1875 he was elected president of the American Medical Association. Hospitals still bear his name, including a West African hospital that utilizes the eponymous gynecological instruments that he at first invented for surgeries upon black female slaves in the 1840s. But this benevolent image vies with the detached Marion Sims portrayed in Robert Thom's J. Marion Sims, Gynecological Surgeon, an oil representation of an experimental surgery upon his powerless slave, Betsy. Sims stands aloof, arms folded, one hand holding a metroscope, the forerunner of the speculum, as he regards the kneeling woman in a coolly evaluative medical gaze. His tie and morning coat contrast with her simple servant's dress, head rag, and bare feet. The painting, commissioned and distributed by the Park Davis Pharmaceutical House more than a century after the surgeries, as one of its History and Medicine in Pictures series, takes telling liberties with the historical facts. Thom portrays Betsy as a fully clothed, calm slave woman who kneels complacently on a small table, hand modestly raised to her breast before a trio of white male physicians. Two other slave women peer around a sheet, apparently hung for modesty's sake, in a childlike display of curiosity. This innocuous tableau could hardly differ more from the gruesome reality in which each surgical scene was a violent struggle between the slaves and physicians, and each woman's body was a bloodied battleground. Each naked, unanesthetized slave woman had to be forcibly restrained by the other physicians through her shrieks of agony as Sims determinedly sliced, then sutured her genitalia. The other doctors who could fled when they could bear the horrific screams no longer. It then fell to the women to restrain one another. I wanted to reproduce Thom's painting on the cover of this book, or at least in the text, but when I asked permission of its copyright holder, Pfizer Incorporated, the company insisted on reviewing the entire manuscript of this book before making a decision. As an independent scholar, I could not acquiesce to this, and I used another cover image. When I renewed my request to use the image within the text, Pfizer agreed to base its decision upon reading this chapter and an outline of the book. The Pfizer executives apparently were uncomfortable with what they read because they refused to grant permission to reproduce this telling image or even respond to my query after I supplied the requested chapter and outline. This act of censorship exemplifies the barriers some choose to erect in order to veil the history of unconscionable medical research with blacks. Betsy's voice has been silenced by history, but as one reads Sims' biographers and his own memoirs, a haughty, self-absorbed researcher emerges, a man who bought black women slaves and addicted them to morphine in order to perform dozens of exquisitely painful, distressingly intimate vaginal surgeries. Not until he had experimented with his surgeries on Betsy and her fellow slaves for years did Sims essay to cure white women. Was Sims a savior or a sadist? It depends, I suppose, on the color of the women you ask. Marion Sims epitomizes the two faces, one benign, one malevolent, of American medical research. Quote, "Of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and the most inhumane." In 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. spoke those words in Montgomery, Alabama, at the end of the Selma to Montgomery march that had been attended by the black and white physicians of the Medical Committee for Human Rights. King had invited the doctors not only to give medical help to injured marchers, but also to witness the abuse suffered at the hands of segregationists. With these almost unnoticed words, King ushered in a new era in civil rights because, as Delegate to Congress Donna Christensen Christian, MD, chair of the Congressional Black Caucus Health Brain Trust, has declared, health disparities are the civil rights issue of the 21st century. Thus, Dr. King's alarm over racial health injustice was prescient, and were he alive today, his concerns would be redoubled. Mounting evidence of the racial health divide confronts us everywhere we look, from doubled black infant death rates to African-American life expectancies that fall years behind whites. Infant mortality of African Americans is twice that of whites. The book, Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington.
On the science revolution this week, can Americans stop the Republican Party and their billionaire buddies before another 100,000 Americans die from COVID-19? Dr. Michael Mann is here, and I'm asking him about the new climate models that are projecting even more extreme warming. Are they correct? Remington Gregg, the Council for Public Citizens, joins me on how the coronavirus continues to spread, yet there are no enforceable health standards coming out of this administration. Also, Chloe Waterman with Friends of the Earth drops by and how we stop meatpacking plants from killing us. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available.
We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and the essence of it is, you know, I use a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, an African American. And the other story out of New York State, where the police officers hogtied this guy, arms, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at thomhartmann.com.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to talk about the schools, but do you mind if I just comment on the Supreme Court, because on the Affordable Care Act that you left off with?
Yeah, I had spaced that. They announced a while ago that they weren't going to release a decision until after the election.
Correct, and this is more corruption, Tom. Think about where we are with the case. This is corruption because it was the Obama administration. Well, first of all, it was the Fifth Court of Appeals in Texas that ruled. That judge said that the Affordable Act is now unconstitutional. So the Obama administration was arguing, no, we want to take it to the Supreme Court. So now the Obama administration is the complainant, right? And so the court, they're asking for time to show that it isn't. All right, so you can, if it were still the Obama administration and they were asking the court to put this off, you could understand, because they're still wanting time to prove their case. But it's the Trump administration, and the Trump administration said, forget it, we're withdrawing the complaint. So, but don't rule until next year? What the hell is that?
Right.
If you withdraw your complaint, the court should say, okay, well, we'll just rule it where the ball is right now. Wherever the ball is right now, we'll make our ruling. Right?
Well, what it is that John Roberts is a Republican, a partisan Republican. He was one of the guys who was advising, I'm forgetting the name of the lawyer. Jim Baker was in charge of the process in 2000 down in Florida, where they were making the arguments before the Supreme Court. He was one of the guys, because he used to be a clerk for Rehnquist.
Yeah.
John Roberts and Brett Kavanaugh were two of the lawyers who were part of that 50-lawyer team that the Republicans had down in Florida, who were teaching lawyers and who were helping write the briefs in Bush v. Gore, where they argued that if all the ballots in Florida were counted again, it would, quote, cause irreparable harm to plaintiff George W. Bush, end quote. And so yeah, John Roberts has been, he used to be in Reagan's Justice Department. I've got a whole chapter about him in my book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court, and right. And his bizarre strategies. So it shouldn't surprise us that he doesn't want to do anything that's going to politically hurt the Trump administration.
Yeah. Well, as for education, what I want to say is, after hearing Trump and Betsy. Well, I think after her interviews on the Sunday shows this week, I think she's earned the title Betsy the Clown. But after hearing what they've said and praising and observing the praises of the Nordic countries of Europe, I thought to myself, the last person that observed and praised the Nordic countries in Europe was called a socialist, and his name is Bernie Sanders. But now, it makes me laugh, but what's so funny about this, as other callers have observed, not only will there not be enough teachers, here's the other problem, is every school district substitutes are at a premium. And one of the things, I'm sure an administrator knows more about it than I do, but one of my friend of mine who lives in California, she's just fairly newly retired, substitutes that they use, probably at least a third of them are retired teachers, and they're older. Like my lady friend, she retires, and what they can do is they can work 45 days at, I think, I don't know if 100% of their salary that they left at, but I think maybe at least 90% of the salary that they left at. They can work 45 days, and the school districts use these people for not only substitute teaching, but all kinds of student management, like assessments, which is what my friend does. She takes, and administrators need that, because every administrator shudders to think that they cannot get their assessments done, because that's how they get money. And so, but the problem is, at least her lady friends are saying, I think we're just going to wait and see what happens. And so all of these retired teachers that are, veteran teachers that the school districts need are not going back. And so they won't even have enough, not only not enough teachers, if the teachers get sick, they won't have enough subs, and they won't, because this whole cadre of subs they're waiting it out to see if it really works. And the other thing is, most of them say, like my friend, she says, I'll start doing my 45 days when the weather gets crappy. It's still nice here in California. I want to go out for my walks and stuff. And when it gets lousy, then I'll start doing my 45 days. I'll start going in. But they're not going to have these people. And finally, another problem is, if this turns into a giant disaster, which it's bound to, they're going to ruin not only the public schools, but they're going to ruin the private schools, because, Tom, teacher education preparation graduates are down in some cases as much as 90%. I read a thing that, in Illinois, 45% less teachers graduated in 2018. In 2018, there was an article that I read that a college you're probably familiar with in Michigan called Grand Valley State, which is a good teacher preparation college, normally graduates 200 teachers a year. In 2018, graduated 20 teachers. Right. So the teachers. Well,
part of that is teachers don't want to get shot at. Part of it is that they're tired of crap pay and being constantly under attack. And now part of it is they don't want to get sick. But, Paul, I don't think they're going to have any students. Axios published this poll this morning This is done by Demographic between July 10th and 2013, a survey of 219 U.S. parents. They asked the question, how much of a risk to your health and well-being is sending your child to school in the fall, right? This is asking parents whether they felt threatened by their kid going to school. 71% said it is either a large or moderate risk. That's 82% of Democrats and 53% of Republicans. You break it down racially, 89% black, 80% Hispanic, 64% white. The male-female ratio is about the same, 72% male, 70% female. But basically 71% of U.S. parents in the new Ipsos Axios Coronavirus Index say it'd be risky to send their children back to school. It's just straightforward stuff. I don't think anybody's going to be showing up, except for the children. And again, this is why one of the main reasons why blacks and Hispanics are wildly overrepresented among the people who are getting and dying of coronavirus. Their children are going to be wildly overrepresented among the children who are bringing it home from school because they're going to school, because those are the people who don't have the kinds of jobs where they can work from home. Those are the people who are our so-called essential frontline workers, by and large, and whether it's driving buses or working in the supermarket or whatever it may be, working construction, working, quote, essential industries. And so, this is, again, we're going to be, 6 months from now or 3 months from now, we're going to be looking at statistics going, holy crap. I mean, with regard to kids who went back to school, it's overwhelmingly hitting black and Hispanics. Well, of course, that's the way we've organized this apartheid society in which we live.
And I think another policy blunder by the federal government, what they should be doing is trying to force people back into school, is they should be spending money and facilitating, crash project in increasing distance learning infrastructure and programs and getting some of the big corporations like Microsoft engaged with the school districts and getting these things up and running. This is the opportunity to do it. It is an opportunity, if you see it that way, because we can still use these distance learning things that we develop along the way in the future. But now is the time. And again, this administration has completely blundered the policy and made the wrong decision rather than take the opportunity, to make make lemonade out of these lemons. They are trying to force it back into what they think is the way to go. And I know that because I know people from Microsoft who say, yeah, we could get going on this. We could solve some of these problems, sure, at least in the short term, and get better distance learning stuff up and running and get equipment out to kids, get equipment out to the schools, get the software up and running so it all works and train the teachers. They're not doing it.
And it could be done both building a nationwide broadband infrastructure and hardening our schools, essentially, or modernizing our schools. It could be done for less than the cost of the Trump tax cut, easily.
Yep.
And it's just mind-boggling that this is not happening. Paul, thank you very much for the call. Always good to hear from you. 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Talk media for the rest of us.
To Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with more of your phone calls. And welcome back. VK in Fort Worth, Texas. Hey, VK, what's on your mind today?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I want to get your mouth a little closer to that microphone, but yes.
Okay. What are your thoughts on the stimulus package that they're trying to get a deal on by the end of July? Do you think they're going to reach a deal or not? Because
are you talking about the act, the HEROES Act that has passed the House of Representatives that Mitch McConnell's sitting on, or are you talking about the short-term negotiation over simply renewing the $600 basically extra or bonus or whatever added to unemployment that the Republicans are screaming about? By the way, none of those are being marketed as stimulus. They're all being marketed as hanging on by our fingernails. But back to you, VK.
Both.
Yeah, both. So what was your question? Do I think they're going to pass?
Do you think they're going to continue the unemployment benefits or not?
I think, to the extent that Republicans are committing political suicide every day that Donald Trump tweets another tweet or steps in front of another microphone, I'm guessing that a lot of Republicans, and probably you're going to see a couple new ones added to the list tomorrow when Republican primaries in Texas and a couple of other states resolve themselves today, are just going to stop being interested in committing political suicide. So I'm guessing that they will pass something within those 5 days when Mitch McConnell brings the Senate back into session a week from now. What it's going to be is going to be the big debate. That $600 is, for some people, they're making more money on unemployment than they were making working, some small percentage. But it's not like people are getting rich off this. Those were people who were so poorly paid to begin with that they were living on the edge. And, now they may be able to pay down their credit card bills a little bit or something like that. But nobody's getting rich off this. Although to hear Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell talk about it, oh, my God, nobody's going to go to work if we give them all this money, which is just complete BS. But, I think the short answer to your question, I think that it's a certainty or a near certainty that they will extend unemployment benefits. Whether they do it at parity or whether they do it with the extra $600 is very much up in the air, VK.
Okay.
Or something in between. Yeah, thanks a lot for your call. I'm guessing that you may have been calling on behalf of yourself, that you're concerned about this. I would suggest anybody who is experiencing unemployment right now and is living on these payments and for whom the $600 a month is important, call your member of Congress now. The main number for the switchboard in Washington, D.C. is 202-224-3121. Call your senators, both your senators. Call your member of the House of Representatives. You may want to call your local governor's office and your state senator and state representative as well. They may have some influence on this. But now is the time to reach out and say, this is my life. This is a lifeline. We need this. We need to keep going. Without this, we had a caller earlier. He's about to lose his home. If the unemployment goes away, he will lose his home. And he's probably one of 3 or 4 or 5 million Americans right now. And, this is just wrong. In the richest country in the world, and we've got, our billionaires made a third of $1 trillion, over $300 billion, just since the coronavirus exploded on the scene in March. And we can't afford to help people out who are underwater because they lost their low-paying jobs? Really? Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with a hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Gary in Inglewood, Florida. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind?
Well, I just think that the Republican Party and Donald Trump are going to try to steal the election. I live in Florida.
Oh, yeah. Count on it.
Oh, I mean, you got Governor Kemp and up in Georgia. You got, Governor DeSantis here. These people are, what would, they lie to us every day. They cheat. They steal. I mean, they are just, it's unbelievable what's going on in this country right now. And why wouldn't they try to steal the election?
Yeah, let's just clearly lay out exactly what's going on here, Gary. The Republican Party, prior to the advent of Ronald Reagan, at least had a governing principle, or a set of governing principles. Back during Dwight Eisenhower's time, for example, he famously wrote to his brother Edgar in 1954 that any political party that tries to take down Social Security or end things like unemployment insurance will never be heard from again. He said their numbers are small and they are idiots, the people who are arguing for that. Well, that's now the entire Republican Party. He campaigned for re-election in 1956. Our Republican president, Eisenhower, campaigned for re-election on a platform of we added over 1 million new people to Social Security and over 2 million new Americans got union membership. He was expanding both programs. The difference between him and the Democrats was that he wanted to do it slowly and gradually, and the Democrats wanted to do it rapidly and had programs like Harry Truman's National Health Care Program. But the Republicans were they weren't opposed to progressive movement forward. They just thought it should be slow and careful. That was their definition of conservative. But starting with Reagan, the Republican Party shifted, and it went to, we are not interested in governing. We're not interested in running the country. Reagan put a guy in charge of the Labor Department who openly hated labor. Organized labor. He put a person, Bill Bennett, in charge of the Education Department who openly hated education. Betsy DeVos, and the same thing with the Trump administration. They're not interested in governing. They don't care about governing. They don't even know how to govern anymore because the whole generation of Republicans who knew how to govern has died out in the 70s and 80s. Well, all they do now is graft and grift. They're looking for ways to skim money off the top or to deliver things to their wealthy buddies so that those wealthy buddies will pay them back with multi-million-dollar jobs when they leave office or with a super fancy lifestyle while they're still in office. Gary, the Republican Party has become nothing but a corrupt scam. Period, full stop.
I agree with you 100%. They're all about minority rule, and they want to be king. They want to be Pharaoh, whatever, Caesar. That's exactly who they are.
Yep, absolutely. And that's why they have to steal elections. And increasingly why they have to steal elections is because Americans have figured it out. Gary, thank you for the call. Well said. David in Shelton, Massachusetts. Hey, David, what's up?
Oh, that's Shelton, Washington. But thank you, Tom, so much for what you do. I would submit to you, and I'm going to ask you, you're an expert on these things. Hasn't Donald Trump violated his oath of office? Can't he be removed that way by Congress?
I believe he has, and the only way that he could be removed is through impeachment. And the Democrats right now, I think, are afraid to impeach him again. They're afraid that it will stir up all kinds of pro-Trump sentiment and give him a chance of winning the election. And, frankly, I'm skeptical. I understand their argument, but I'm skeptical. So, anyway, David, thank you for the call. Renee in St. Louis, Missouri. Hey, Renee, what's up?
Hi, Tom. You have got a lot on my mind. Okay, so I've made a list of 6 different items, but I know I can only say one thing. Okay?
We got about a minute and a half here. 2 minutes.
Oh, we got a minute and a half. I'm going to try to make my rant fast. Number 1, we all have established that America is a plantation. Now, Donald Trump is a sociopath. So you know how you have to handle a sociopath. Now, with America being a plantation, he clearly missed the first business class that told us about Maslow's pyramid of hierarchy, how to keep the workers happy. Right. So if you want to keep the business going, doesn't it make sense to make sure that your workers have everything they need to take care of, particularly when you say we're the richest country in the world? Then I wrote down a list.
I'm sorry. Let me just give you a little fact.
Go ahead.
In 1887, I believe it was in the 1880s, the Bismarck of Germany, who was basically the emperor, or the leader, gave everybody in the country free health insurance through their jobs. I mean, it was positioned as job insurance, but basically it was free health insurance. And there were several other big social reforms he did. He didn't do that because he was a generous guy. He did it because Karl Marx's writings were sweeping the continent and he wanted to prevent a revolution. He did it to keep people happy. Back to you.
Yes. So Trump had to have missed that business class that explained Maslow's pyramid. He missed that.
Yep.
That's the reason why and that's another reason why he's filed bankruptcy 6, maybe 8 times. Mm-hmm. And why he got caught up. Now, the other problem is he had that daddy that was a KKK Grand Dragon.
Yeah, I don't think we've established that he was a Grand Dragon, but he was certainly arrested at a Klan rally.
Okay, he was, okay.
Close
the child is scarred.
Yes, he is.
Stars.
Yeah, I got Mary Trump's book yesterday and read the first maybe 50 to 70 pages of it yesterday.
Oh, are you going to read that to us?
We should do that. It is tragic,
Please.
I mean, it is tragic.
Okay.
You know what?
Now
what
we
this,
go back
what
to
this family went
Freud and Kennison and all of the other 27 psychiatrists that clearly stated something's wrong. Y'all can see something wrong with him. Get him out.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Thanks, Tom.
Renee, thank you. Good talking to you. We'll be back. We're hitting the top of the hour here. We'll be back. I want to dig into. Well, there's a number of things that I think are absolutely fascinating. But Los Angeles and San Diego saying, no, we're not going to cancel we're going to cancel our in-person school. And Hitler's brown shirts are in training. Got to tell you about this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at raycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had masters' slaves, feudalism had lords' serfs, and monarchy had king subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
You ever hear of the Sturmabteilung, also known as the SA, the Assault Division? They were sometimes referred to as stormtroopers. They started out as brown shirts. This was a violent paramilitary group that was part of the Nazi army, but it didn't start out that way. It started out this way back when its leader, Ernst Röhm, was in the beer halls, and Hitler was coming into the beer halls, and he needed basically security. And so in 1921, there was this anti-democratic wing, small d democratic. And Mussolini, by the way, was doing the same thing in Italy around the same time. Keep in mind, this is 1921. Hitler didn't rise to power in Germany until 1932, or maybe early 33. In fact, I think it was February 33. But in any case, this is a decade earlier, 1921. And Hitler turns his security guys into basically his own private army. And then they followed him through his rise to power in Germany. They followed him into the army. They followed him in 1923 through the beer hall push. They stayed with him when he was sent to jail. During the last half of the 1920s, Röhm returned in 1931 to lead the brown shirts. They went to 3 million members in only 2 years. The principal thing that the SA was doing back then, the brown shirts were doing back then, in addition to, quote, defending Hitler, being his private guards, his private police, is they were trashing Jews. They would go into and labor union leaders and labor, unionized workers. They would go into their homes and trash them. They would go into their places of business and trash them. They were basically terrorists. And so here you have the precedent of a fascistic government and, a proto-fascist himself, right, Adolf Hitler, saying, let's take these really angry young men and who are civilians and teach them how to use weapons and teach them how to execute citizens' arrests, a power that existed in Germany in the 1920s. Teach them how to use billy clubs and handcuffs. Let's give them some technical training. Let's professionalize them. And what came out of that were the stormtroopers. This is from the Shoah Research Center, created in 1922. The SA's the supposed purpose was to guard Nazi Party meetings, but in actuality, Hitler meant for the group to serve eventually as the Nazi army. The SA was extremely anti-Semitic and anti-democratic in its military activities. Its members were mainly lower-class Germans who had lost their jobs due to the country's economic problems. The brown shirts, the membership, the SA gave them something to be part of, something to be proud of. They engaged in street fights with their political enemies. They practiced pseudo-military exercises. And ultimately, they terrorized Germany. Then they talk about how Ernst Röhm came in and took over the SA. Röhm took on the task with a vengeance. In just a few short years, the SA's membership grew from 70,000 to more than 4 million. Röhm divided Germany into 21 military-like districts, creating flying squads and the Nazi Motor Corps, and reorganized the SA High Command. When Hitler rose to national power in 1933, the SA became an official government organization. SA soldiers then joined the regular police in order to arrest and torture ideological, political, and even personal enemies of Adolf Hitler. They set up concentration camps for this purpose. However, in Rome shown, well, and then it goes into the Night of the Long Lives and all that stuff. So it's not like we don't have history warning us. As I said, Mussolini did the same thing, only his guys wore black shirts. They were called the Black Shirts, his volunteer force. So in the context of this, I want to share with you a story that was published in Newsweek magazine on the 9th of this month. The title of it, it's by Chantal de Silva. The title of it is ICE Offering, quote, Citizens Academy, close quote, course with training on how to arrest immigrants. And I'll just read you the little bits from the story. Chantal De Silva writes, first paragraph. The U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE agency, is set to launch a 6-week Citizens Academy on immigration enforcement, which will include training for civilians on how to arrest undocumented immigrants. ICE Chicago Field Office Director Robert Guadian invited shareholders to participate in the course, which includes 6 days of training over a 6-week period starting this September. The letter that went out to the people that they think are their peeps, I don't know what list they're working from, maybe a Proud Boy membership list. You have been identified as a valued member of the community who may have an interest in participating in the inaugural class of the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Removal Operations Chicago Citizens Academy. Guadian says this is the first of its kind. It'll serve as a pilot for the nationwide implementation. Included in the course, he said, will be training in, quote, defensive tactics, firearms familiarization, and targeted arrests. The training, by the way, will be conducted in a safe and positive environment. Right. This is, I mean, it just goes on and on and on. This is asked by The Guardian what's going on. This was Albrico. I'm trying to find this guy's name. Well, he's one, here it is. ICE spokesperson, oh, it's a woman, Nicole Albrico. Albrico said, like other law enforcement agencies' academies, there's often a unit in self-defense and de-escalation. All federally trained law enforcement officers go through such training, and the Academy wants to show the community what this training looks like. Additionally, ICE wants to show the humanitarian efforts and due process that is behind every targeted immigration arrest. In a separate statement provided by ICE, The Guardian said, quote, the Academy is a natural progression from the outreach work we have already been doing in our community. Our community meetings are only a few hours long, but this is a 6-week opportunity for the community to get to know our officers and understand our mission. So, if you're a white guy who is freaked out about brown people being in the country without legal authority, and you want to carry a gun and handcuffs, Donald Trump has got something for you, and it's starting in Chicago with the ICE Chicago Field Office. Amazing. Sarah John, the executive director of the IFCLA, said, the Citizens Academy program, we are outraged at the launch of yet another immoral initiative used by ICE to criminalize and destroy our families. The Citizens Academy program will train citizens to perpetuate race-based violence and further normalizes hate crimes that already devastate our neighborhoods. Our tax dollars should not be spent on this hatred, especially not when a global pandemic continues to wreak havoc on our neighborhoods. This blatant endorsement of white supremacy, coded in a false display of patriotism. Hang on, I'll finish this in a second.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Seeks to excuse racial profiling and only will lead to increased violence, hatred, and xenophobia in our community. Brown. And welcome back. Let's see here. Rose in Chicago. Oh, hey, Rose, I'm going to put you back on hold. Your station, WCPT, is on commercial break right now. Angela in New York City watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Angela, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Waiting a while to talk to you, and now I've lost my train of thought. It's all horror right now.
It says here you want my take on COVID and elections.
Yeah, I'm at this point terrified about what's going to happen when the summer's over. With people talking, or Betsy DeVos talking about sending kids to their deaths in September, and the cold weather and the election, I feel like chaos is about to break out. I'm terrified about what's going to happen in the later part of this year because the Republicans are walking around acting like they already won the election. And what scares me even more is that people around me and people that I talk to online, offline, whatever, most of them are just counting on this election and they're not seeing anything else. And I've been seeing, and I see, and a lot of people see, that this is some serious trouble. We're headed for a major catastrophe. And I wanted to get your take on what do you think is going to happen? I mean, I feel like they're going to steal the election. And what are our options then? Because nobody's out there. And what are the Democrats doing? Because I don't see them doing anything.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the Democratic Party has been real active. They're mobilizing lawyers all over the country. They're trying to get election protection stuff going. You've got independent groups like Stacey Abrams' group, Fair Vote, is out there, working on or actually it's not Fair Vote, it's Fair Fight, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Fair Fight, yeah, they're working on that. There are, frankly, a lot of people who are doing everything they can to try to help us have reasonable elections. On the other hand, though, the Supreme Court is not helping. They're upholding, they upheld the right of Wisconsin to force people to have physical elections. The Republicans are planning on that. So, Angela, I think the only thing that we can do, or the main thing that we can do with regard to the election, and I agree with you, we should not be putting all our hopes on one election. It's, at the very best, if Democrats take the House, the Senate, and the White House, a whole brand new struggle begins over the values that the Democratic Party is going to, hold up. But I think that the main thing that we have to do now is make sure that everybody we know, is, particularly in these red states that are rapidly becoming purple states, Texas, Georgia, Florida, these are states that may well go for Joe Biden and for Democrats, and where Republican senators may get kicked out. And these are the states, the Carolinas, the Dakotas, these are the states where you're going to see massive voter suppression efforts. And a large part of that is kicking people off the voting rolls. So people need to double check their registration. Go ahead.
What I can't figure out is that the virus is being allowed to spread in Trump country. I mean, he's basically killing his own supporters. And I'm watching this and I'm saying, what does that mean? He's killing his own supporters, and yet they're still running around with this anti-mask thing, and they're still pledging their allegiance to this death cult. How do we deal? Why are they doing that? Why is Trump doing this?
I think it's been a fundamental miscalculation by Donald Trump trying to run with his gut. I've said several times, if he wanted to pull this, con job, he should have done it in October, because the economy would start opening up in early November, and people wouldn't realize that there was a giant foot going to step on all of us, a month later. We'll see. Angela, thank you for the call. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I think I mentioned briefly, I just want to emphasize this, as Betsy DeVos went on all the weekend shows and basically said, we have no federal plan. There is no plan for reopening the schools, but damn it, we want them open. At least the public schools. The private schools, especially for upper class white kids, they can do distance learning. That's no problem. But the public schools, oh yeah, they've got to open back up. Don't you have a plan? Any kind of plan? Dana Bash was saying, no, we got no plan at all. But it's going to happen. I mean, it is essentially what Trump has been saying about reopening the country. Well, San Diego and Los Angeles have both said, screw that. 825,000 students are in those two school districts, and they have both said, we are not going to have in-class classrooms this fall. It's all going to be virtual. And we need to be doing this all across the country. I mean, this is just nuts. Barbara in Oh, hang on just a second here. There we go. Barbara in Las Vegas. Hey, Barbara, what's on your mind?
Las Vegas, New Mexico.
Oh, New Mexico. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to comment on, you were talking about the brown shirts and ICE, and I wanted to remind everyone to read It Can't Happen Here by Sinclair Lewis. If you haven't read it, or reread it, because it's a scary book.
Yeah, Buzz Winthrop was the newspaper publisher, and the corpos, the people who were in favor of corporate rule, those were the partisans who were in favor of the president. I forget the president's name in that story. Do you remember?
No.
Yeah, it's just an amazing story. Basically, it's how the rise of populism and basically right-wing fascism can do in a country. And Sinclair Lewis wrote that book back in the 1920s. He was obviously looking at what was going on in Europe, and I believe it was the 1920s, and maybe even the early 30s, but I think it was the 20s. And here we are. Barbara, thank you. Thank you for the reminder. Dave in Blue Hill, Maine. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how's it going, Tom? Yeah, bouncing off, too, we were talking about education and teachers. My sister, I had a nice conversation with her the other day. She's a school teacher, worried, of course. And what she basically did, she went to her doctor and had him write a note saying she has asthma, she has COPD, medical conditions, basically saying she's not going to retire, she's not going to quit, but putting the emphasis on the schools is to say, hey, if something happens, this is on you, because she has to protect herself. And
wait a second, Dave. Did she do this so that if anything happens to her, she or her survivors would be able to sue the school district because they were warned in advance that they were putting her at risk? Or did she do this so that she would have a get-out-of-school card note?
Well, it was mostly, I think for her, it was kind of like, I don't want to retire, but as they're putting together their plan just to say, hey, let's see what we can do about opening up. Her saying like, hey, I'm a teacher. This is what you're looking at too. Okay, you want to do for the kids, whatever. This is what's on me. And if anything happens
she's probably asking to be at the bottom of the list of the people who get called back. So she'd be the last called back then. Is that what you're saying?
Possibly, but she's encouraging some of her other teacher friends to do it too, just to say, hey, if you have any medical conditions, you tell the school board, this is what's going on for me, because while they're worried about, the kids, her thing is just saying for the teachers as well as like the custodial staff and whatever, but to remind the things like, hey, the adults.
Yeah. Excellent
that's
point.
Getting that's out of mix. Yep.
Yeah. Dave, thank you. Let me know how that works out for her. If she gets any kind of a positive response from the school district, it might be something that other people who are listening who may be teachers or no teachers would want to know about. Rose in Chicago. Hey, Rose, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I've long thought that for any given topic like COVID-19, that Trump plays both sides of it. That way his supporters can see or hear what they want to, whichever side fits their particular position. Even as far as wearing masks, he verbally says he supports mask wearing, but physically he doesn't wear one. So his mask-wearing fans hear him saying it's okay for them to wear a mask, and his mask deniers can point to the images of him going mask-free to justify why they might refuse to. And even as far as something like DACA, first he tries to get the Supreme Court to overturn it, and he turns around and tells the DACA recipients that he wants to give them a path to citizenship. So again, not so much as a flip-flopping do I see it, but rather playing both sides. What do you think? You think that's part of his playbook?
I'm not sure that that's an intentional playbook so much as that's just the outcome of having somebody who just says stuff that comes to mind, whether it's true or not. And I was reading Mary Trump's book yesterday. She made the comment, where Trump was talking to his own family at the White House. He had invited them for a birthday party for his sister and for two of his sisters. And he told a story that everybody in the family knew, but he embellished it. He added some lies to it to turn it into a, quote, better story. And she said, that's just what Donald does, with everything, every story, everything he says. He basically has to embellish it. He has to tell lies. He has to put himself at the center of it. And, this is the characteristic of somebody who's badly psychologically wounded and certainly should not be in the White House. But I don't think that I think you're giving him too much credit if you think that there's a strategy here, Rose.
Okay. All right. Well, it's interesting. I appreciate your take on that. Thank you.
Yeah, it is. Thank you very much, Rose. Good to hear from you. And, I'd pick up another call, but I only have 20 seconds. So I just have to say this. Oh, there was one other thing I wanted to talk about. This is China. Actually, I'll get into this. I'll get into this tomorrow. The Trump administration took a stand with regard to China today, or yesterday, that could very easily lead to war. And I'm very concerned about this. We'll do it tomorrow, though, and we've got a little more elbow room, a little more time to really dig into it. Coming up on 28 minutes past the hour, it's the Thom Hartmann Program. If the Republican Party has to reinvent itself after Donald Trump, how do you think they're going to do it? It's another topic I've been really rolling around in my head. What is the fate and future of this thing? We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back with your calls. Stick around. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings through our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms and our fields, our streets and our sewers, our bodies and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until, at last, we realize it has been our own mouth screaming and we are lost. A child born today inherits, in that secret, a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Healthcare is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate health care has convinced us that some people deserve health care and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty, while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer health care, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide health care to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest healthcare program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith.
I believe beyond any doubt that single payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy, and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of health care. I believe this health care is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are health care. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer health care is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single-payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people, and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met in my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18 and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. The book, Health Justice Now, Timothy Faust.
On the Science Revolution this week, can Americans stop the Republican Party and their billionaire buddies before another 100,000 Americans die from COVID-19? Dr. Michael Mann is here, and I'm asking him about the new climate models that are projecting even more extreme warming. Are they correct? Remington Gregg, the Council for Public Citizen, joins me on how the coronavirus continues to spread, yet there are no enforceable health standards coming out of this administration. Also, Chloe Waterman with Friends of the Earth drops by on how we stop meatpacking plants from killing us. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available.
In our latest video for folks who support our show over at thomhartmann.com, it's pretty mind-boggling, actually. The candidate Trump back in 2016 said, I'm not going to cut Social Security like every other Republican, and I'm not going to cut Medicare or Medicaid. Every other Republican is going to cut, but I won't. That's what he said. Well, what did his budget actually propose? His budget actually proposed, this is last year's budget. Congress didn't pass it, thank God, but this is what his budget proposed. $1.9 trillion in cuts to Medicare and Medicaid, and $26 billion in cuts to Social Security. And now he is block granting Medicaid to the states, which is already cutting back on Medicaid programs in the red states. You can check it all out over at thomhartmann.com.
Oh, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Helena in Vancouver. Hey, Helena, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you again for having me on. I just had a horrible thought about, why Republican Party wants our schools to be open. And why, Psycho Daniel, the traitorous Republican Party, is doing this. And I think it's more to this than just devote Betsy DeVos wanting to privatize schools. Back in the beginning of the World War, invaded Poland. They went to every bigger cities and arrested all known researchers, college professors, writers, teachers, and they executed them in cutting, leaving Poland populace terrorized and without any intelligence and without leaders. So I just wanted to share that with you, that maybe there is a more malice thought behind sending our teachers and students back to, coronavirus. Yeah.
It's a thought that is pretty much verboten on network television, but I've expressed this concern out loud more than once, and I think a lot of Americans are thinking this way. If there was a non-American, a foreign leader, who did not like America, did not like American values, saw Americans' values, saw democracy, women's rights, pluralism as a threat to their hold on power, and they wanted to essentially destroy this country. And, obviously everybody's mind goes to Putin because all the ties between Trump and Putin, but it could just as easily be Mohammed bin Salman, who runs Saudi Arabia, where, they still keep slaves and women are basically chattel, et cetera, et cetera. Or it could be Duterte in the Philippines, or it could be Erdogan in Turkey, who's openly threatened Trump that he would lose both his properties if he goes against Erdogan. But let's say that some autocrat somewhere in the world has Trump by the short hairs, has him by the neck, by the throat, because he loaned $1 billion to Trump's son-in-law, and he probably loaned a couple $100 million to Trump, or his people did. And he says to Trump, you have to destroy America. You have to completely ruin this country. You have to throw the government in, you have to tear the government apart, fire, lay off, or get rid of half your government workforce so that the government can't do anything well, cause your people to no longer believe in their own form of government. So they will be open to things like autocratic government, like, having, like Saudi Arabia has, and kill as many Americans as you possibly can. I don't see how Trump executing that command would do anything different from what he's doing right now. Can you?
Yeah. No. And what will happen when the teacher gets sick? Are they going to quarantine all the students that teacher had? Are they going to, to me, it's just insane talk.
Well, this is why in Taiwan they're doing classes of no more than 10 people, and the kids, you have one teacher, one teacher's assistant, 10 kids. They're all together from the beginning of the day until the end of the day, and that way if anybody pops up sick, they can quarantine the entire group without bringing the whole school down. They don't eat in the cafeteria, they eat in the classroom. The meals are brought to the classroom and left outside like home delivery from Grubhub kind of thing. And the reason that they can do this is because they threw a few $1 billion at their schools to outfit them and bring them up to speed. They've also changed the ventilation systems in their schools, so they're not simply recirculating the same air. So that if you've got one classroom with a couple of sick kids in it and they're coughing, it's not infecting the whole entire school. We're doing none of that.
Yes, and on
we're doing none of that.
Yeah, what is the rate of infection in Taiwan right now? Do you know?
I believe that Taiwan has been a couple of weeks now with no cases or very, very low numbers. I think that the total number of people who have died in Taiwan is less than 300 in the entire thing. I'm not sure what the total infection rate is. Actually,
so I can see why they can open the school and try this nut.
Yeah. And let's see, I'm looking here at, this is state or county. I don't know how to search on the Johns Hopkins one. I just have to scroll down through the list and maybe there's a search function over here because.
I hope that American people are not
Sean
going
tells
to
me that
fall
they have,
for this.
Taiwan has 451 cases and they've had 7 deaths. Is that in the last 24 hours,
Yes.
Sean, or is that? She says she thinks that's overall. I mean, that's pretty. I'd be surprised if it's actually that low in total cases. But the bottom line is most of these other countries have this under control, Helena, and we don't. I have to move along, but thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you, Dave in St. Paul, Nebraska. Excuse me, St. Paul, Nebraska. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Happy Bastille Day.
Thank you. Is today Bastille Day?
It is. It is.
Wow.
There's something to be learned from the French, although I prefer a bloodless coup. But regardless, on the brown shirt kind of situation, taking thugs to be your private army or security, something like that, they tried that in the music industry with the Hells Angels being security for Janis Joplin in California, San Francisco. And
this is where the guy got stabbed at, was it Altamont?
Altamont, yes. That's where it all went south.
In the late 60s, yeah.
Yeah. And so, the left dabbled in that, if you want to call it, music people in the left, like I am. But they got...
I would say that was just an attempt to get cheap security. but that did not work out well at all. And I don't think that this is going to work out either. I'm very concerned about it. Dave, thank you for the call. Lewis in Branson, Missouri. Hey, Lewis, what's up?
Good. I think what I have is food for thought here, is that if you follow the money, how many people are dying and that they don't have to pay veterans funds, Medicare, Medicaid, old people in hospitals dying, Black and Hispanics dying at a bigger pace. They want to send these kids to school to get infected, to come back into their homes to kill the Democratic Party. They're doing it, and they're
Lewis, you're echoing my Stephen Miller eugenics theory. That Stephen Miller, I mean, keep in mind, the first week that Trump was in power was when Stephen Miller started, or these guys started this whole thing of let's separate children from their families and put these children in cages in prison. Jacob Soboroff's book, I'm trying to get a copy of it, and I want to get him on as a guest, but from the clips that I've seen and the excerpts, is just breathtaking in this regard. And so, if he's that into racism and eugenics, why would he not be into the model that you're talking about? And this goes back to my April 6th thing. On April 6th, it was announced to the United States and the world that disproportionately Black and brown people and old people were dying. And all of a sudden, the entire Republican Party changed from, oh my God, we've got a virus, to, oh boy, we've got to reopen. And I think you've nailed it. I think that this is eugenics. This is the Tuskegee experiment all over again.
There you go. Yeah, just follow the money. Find out how much money they're stolen. They got to pay for the trillions of dollars that they've stolen. So
and this way they're cutting Social Security expenses. They're cutting Medicaid expenses that are used for long-term nursing care. They're reducing the total population of Black and brown people relative to white people in this country. I mean, it's just
there you go.
This is not rocket science. Lewis, thank you. Well said. 45 minutes past the. I realize you almost think this has got to be some sort of weird conspiracy theory, and Hartmann's got to be way out there. Well, please tell me how I'm wrong on this. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I mean, Stephen Miller and Donald Trump and Kirstjen Nielsen, they've already had a bunch of kids die in these children's cages that they've got. And coronavirus is ripping through those now, too. And welcome back. Mayor in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Mayor, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I don't know if you've seen the latest ugly police arrest that happened in Allentown.
No.
No. Okay. Well, it was the other day, and there was this man staggering up, arresting him, knee on the head, similar to the George Floyd arrest.
George Floyd.
Yeah. And I thought, okay, I want to see how different news outlets covered this story. So I scrolled around to a couple of them, and I'm looking at this one, and I'm like, what? The camera angle couldn't account for this because, I mean, the guy was close up to the police, and then the one policeman shoved him. I said, no, this is not a camera angle thing. I looked at the timestamp. It happened a year before. Same emergency room. And I just have to say, what is going on? Why are the police...
Wait a minute. What did I miss here? You've got two separate videos from a year apart where the police are behaving the same way?
Slightly different behavior on the person's part, but the police in both instances arrested a man in front of, St. Luke's Sacred Heart emergency room.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that blew my mind. I mean, yeah, I had to check the time.
So the cops have the ER staked out? Is that the deal?
I have no idea. It seems like that, but what is that's what I have to say. What is going on? It's like they were right there when the guy came staggering in, and they just were standing there, kind of watching him at first, and then there's no sound on the tape, so it was just right. You could see him saying something to them. They said something to him. The next thing you know, he's on his knees, and then he's putting his hands out. But I mean, the man is obviously sick, and they end up wrestling him, the way they did George Floyd. It just blew my mind. And then to go back and see like another set of facts and went, whoa, this can't be right. That's camera angle could not account for this disparity of facts. So then I looked at the timestamp and went, are you kidding me? A year ago, there was another arrest in front of the same emergency room.
Yeah, I think the ubiquity
I'm just putting that out there.
Yeah, I think the ubiquity of cameras in our cell phones now is literally changing who can get away with what in this society. And,
right.
And,
well, you remember
what's being exposed is police violence.
Remember years ago that there were news outlets that were giving people in totalitarian regimes camcorders?
Yep.
Yeah,
back in the 80s and 90s, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the idea has really caught on in so-called free America.
It has. Mira, thank you for the call. Thanks for the heads up. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with a hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. Hey, we have a special new video up for supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. And it's about how FDR in 1944, in fact, January 44, in his State of the Union address, talked about how important it was to add rights to the Bill of Rights. The original Bill of Rights was all political rights. He said it's time to enshrine economic rights in our Constitution. I would add, like most of the governments of Europe have done. And this includes the right to housing, the right to food, the right to a good job that pays well, the right to an education, including a college education, and the right to health care. It is pretty powerful stuff. And frankly, I think that what this coronavirus crisis is proving is that we are all in this together, and that Reagan's thing about government is never going to help you was just a load of crap. And so you can check it out over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Jake in Seattle. Hey, Jake, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I wanted to put out a hysteria alert here. Just actually caught this on the commander in chief, or the Cheeto in chief's Twitter page. But MSNBC reported 2 days ago they did random sampling, 5 pediatricians. All 5 of them said, "Oh yeah, we'd send our kids back to school, and that it would generally be safe. And evidence shows that children are highly are not as susceptible to the virus, nor are they as likely to spread the virus." So I just kind of, as far as having these Republicans sending kids back to school to kill them off, I think that we're getting a little ahead of ourselves on that.
Yeah. Both those things are true, Jake. Children are less likely to get infected, and even when they are infected, they're less likely to be highly contagious because, there's a whole bunch of theories about this. There's one theory, actually, that the MMR vaccine, I read this in a debate about this among doctors in the British Medical Journal, BMJ, that the MMR vaccine might be activating an immune response that makes young people more resistant to this. They think that might be why the USS, Teddy Roosevelt, whatever that ship was, where the captain, pleaded for help. They had 955 soldiers, or maybe it was 755 soldiers who were infected. Only one of them required hospitalization. They had all within the previous year gotten the MMR vaccine. So, there's interesting speculation about why this is, but the fact of the matter is kids are less likely to get it and less likely to transmit it. But that doesn't mean that they're not capable of doing it. And that's the problem. This is why countries where the number of cases in the country is down to just a few hundred, active cases or new cases a day, a few dozen new cases a day, in some cases no new cases a day for a week or two, as was happening in Israel, for example. I told this story earlier. So they said, okay, cool, we can reopen our schools, and boom, 47% of all the cases now are coming from kids in school. And it's because it doesn't take a lot of cases to spread it. And but if you've got very few cases and you've got really good contact tracing and testing, then maybe you could partly reopen your schools.
Absolutely.
But you have to do it very, very carefully, and you have to have small classrooms, and you have to reconfigure. Go ahead.
We'll convince a lot more people with that argument compared to the rhetoric that they're doing this to kill children, and I just think it's important that. We build our message not to excite the base, but to build the bridge so some of these Trump supporters can see the folly. So thanks a lot, Tom.
Yeah, you're welcome, Jake. And that's a good point. As much as I like to talk about Stephen Miller being a eugenicist. Helen in Belleville, Illinois. Hey, Helen, I used to spend summers in Belleville. My uncle worked in the Air Force
I'd like to be out dancing, but I can't. But anyway. That and gardening takes my days. But anyway, did you know that the teachers in St. Louis, Missouri, yesterday were protesting? They want distance learning. And it was on the news last night.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Teachers have to be terrified. This is just a really tough time.
And then the governor also last year, or this year, reduced the education budget too. At the same time. Of course,
he's a Republican. Yeah.
Yes. And so I don't know if there are any other cities that had protests by teachers or not.
Yeah, I'm guessing there probably were, Helen, but thanks for the report from your local media there. Belleville's right across the river from St. Louis. I appreciate the call. Thank you. Terry in Eugene, Oregon. Hey, Terry, you had a question?
Real quick, Tom, thank you for taking my call. This whole thing with the government, can the states bypass the government and issue their own checks to help cover people's mortgages, rents, and stuff like that? So, is that even
the problem, Terry? The problem is that there's not a single state that can issue its own currency, so whereas the federal government can. So if a state wants to pass out money that basically they don't have, they have to do one of two things. They either have to very aggressively and very rapidly raise taxes, and during times of high unemployment, even that is a challenge, or they're going to have to issue bonds. They're going to have to borrow large amounts of money. And right now, state and municipal bonds the interest rates are going up and the value of those bonds is going down. It's getting harder and harder to sell bonds. So states, the federal government is in a unique position. It controls the creation of our currency, and it has a virtually unlimited ability to borrow money to fund things. And in fact, our budget deficit is going to be $800 billion just this month. Typically that's 1 year. But that's not a problem for the federal government. But for a state government, it would put them out of business. They just, every state constitution, or every but maybe one, I think Vermont's the only one that doesn't require a balanced budget, and they always have it anyway. Thanks so much. A great question, though, Terry. Thanks for calling and asking that. And thank you all for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. It being Wednesday, I'm guessing we'll have Congressman Mark Pocan on, and we'll continue with the program. We'll be back tomorrow. Until then, get out there, get active, tag your it. Tell your friends about Progressive Media. Thanks. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at raycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm wrinkle reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.